The movie begins with a young man walking in the Verbeek Mountains in the United States. In the cold snowy mountains, a young man named Christopher McCandless tries to become one with nature. In the mountains, Chris saw the wreckage of a bus containing some household items. He then shouted and called if anyone was around, but no one was seen or answered his screams. The scene moves to 2 years before Chris wanders into the woods. Chris has just graduated from Emory University, majoring in anthropology, with satisfactory grades. His parents came from California to Georgia to attend their son's graduation. Chris's father is an antenna expert who works for NASA, while his mother is a secretary who works for an airline company. Chris and his family then eat at a fancy restaurant, discussing Chris's future. Chris said he wanted to continue his master's degree in law at Harvard. The warm atmosphere was suddenly quiet when Dad said that he had prepared a new car as a gift because Chris's car was outdated. The atmosphere became tense because Chris bought the car with his hard work, but his father just thought it was a wreck. He then continued that his father always saw everything in terms of material, not hard work. Chris suddenly got inspiration and changed direction from wanting to continue his master's degree at Harvard to wanting to live an adventurous life without being overshadowed by his parents' wealth. Even the money his parents gave him for education amounted to $25,000, which was donated to social foundations. Chris then chooses to leave a life full of wealth and go with his old car to explore the outside world. In the middle of the trip, precisely in Arizona, Chris felt tired and pulled his car over on a hill. But he did not realize there was a flash flood that hit his car. Chris allowed his car to be crushed by the flood. Even the next day, he seemed to throw away his car number plate and burn some of his cash. Chris's journey to adventure in the wild begins. In July 1990, Chris was at Lake Mead, Arizona, a month later. He seems to have set up a tent on the lake's edge. His hair started growing long, and he decided to create a new identity, Alexander Supertramp. He did this so that no one would recognize him. He then started walking for a ride like a traveler with a backpack on his back. Chris's parents were already getting restless at that time because they had not received news from their eldest son. Therefore, his parents rushed to Atlanta to visit Chris's rented house. This is where they find out that Chris has been gone for 2 months. The letter they sent yesterday had never been opened, of course. This disappointed Chris's parents. But his sister understood Chris's feelings about his desire to travel. Because of all this time, Chris has been living in luxury under the shadow of his parents. In August 1990, Chris appeared to have arrived at the Pacific Crest Hiking Trail in Northern California. The Pacific Crest Hiking Trail is a favorite route for climbers to climb Mount Sierra in Nevada. Chris enjoyed the thick trees and saw the deer from a distance. Despite being surrounded by beautiful nature, he did not continue his ascent because he wanted to move to another location. He then got a ride in a van owned by a hippie couple named Ronnie and Jane. As a hippie who lives freely and does not obey the rules, Ronnie and Jane often go on adventures in several places. They then went to the beach for the night and lit a bonfire together. Ronnie then told the problems experienced by Jane, that she was initially uncomfortable with Chris's presence because it provoked her trauma. Chris then took the initiative to invite Jane to chat, and they seemed to have fun together. Finally, the relationship and Ronnie also improved after the tension between them. In the morning, Chris left a note of thanks to Ronnie and Jane while they were still sleeping. Chris continued his journey. He seemed to enjoy whatever he found along the way. He didn't feel the slightest bit worried. Meanwhile, in early September, Chris's Datsun was found by the Arizona police. The police have reported it to Chris's parents. However, police information based on identification showed no signs of a break-in or robbery. Police believe that Chris left his car on purpose. Chris's parents realized that Chris had deliberately run away and wandered without wanting to be found. Meanwhile, on September 10, 1990, Chris got a job in a wheat field. Wayne, who is the boss, teaches him how to harvest wheat. Not only that, but he also made Chris his best friend. Wayne then invites Chris to go to a bar. At that place, Chris says that the ultimate destination of his adventure is the mountains of Alaska. He is doing this because he is fed up with the hustle and bustle of the city and the hypocrisy. Even he revealed that he was also fed up with his parents, who always said where his life was going. He then said that his trip was motivated by his favorite novel, Call of the Wild by Jack London. The next day, Wayne then taught Chris how to survive in the forest. He also taught Chris the techniques of hunting wild animals. He then advised not to eat meat infested with flies or larvae. Suddenly, the police and the FBI surrounded their house in their activities. As it turned out, they were going to arrest Wayne because of the legal action he took. It turns out that apart from being a wheat farmer, Wayne also runs a black box buying and selling business which functions to hack cable TV, so its accessors can watch it without paying. Finally, Wayne was imprisoned for 4 months to account for his actions. His imprisonment makes Chris's plans to continue his journey fall apart. Chris then recalled the main reason for his trip. where Chris, when he graduated from college, managed to buy a car with his own efforts. He then traveled all the way to California to visit his family. From this trip, Chris learned of the fact that when his mother was pregnant with him, his father's position was still tied to another woman, namely his first wife. Even after Chris was born, his father still had another child from his first wife. That fact also made Chris realize that he and his sister were illegitimate children, and what made him even angrier was the attitude of his parents, who did not want to admit their sins, which he called hypocrisy. Chris then continued his journey using a kayak taken from the trash. He followed a fast river until he finally met a young couple. He was given a hot dog by them. But before he got to know them more, Chris saw a river patrol chasing him. He then continued his journey by land because he did not have a license to drive a vehicle on water. Chris had wanted to call his parents to ask for help with the only coin, but he gave the last money to an old man who was calling his ex-wife. Carrying a makeshift provision that was obtained with the help of others, Chris finally continued his journey to the river to get to the Mexican border. During the trip, Chris lived in a cave for 36 days until his kayak was damaged in the Sea of Cortez. Chris was forced to return to the mainland and ask the police for help in seeking asylum. He returned to the city of California to wait in line for the homeless to stay. He then walked through the city to see the activities of modern people who had previously lived. He also remembered his former life, which was constrained by his parents' coercion to become a successful person. Chris was then a passenger on a freight train to arrive in the wild, but unfortunately, this time, his attempt to ride it failed because it was caught by train security. For a time, Chris then worked at a fast food restaurant so that he could have the fare to continue his journey to Alaska. At the same time, Chris's disappearance makes his parents more religious, and they hope their son can return home. The day changed, and it was December 1991. By chance, Chris met again with the couple hippie Ronnie and Jane in Slab City, California. Slab City is famous for being a gathering place for the hippie community. At that place, Chris enjoys being with Ronnie and Jane, watching music entertainment every night with artists from Slab City, including a beautiful woman named Tracy Tetro. Chris also lives with the Slab City community until he is paid before Christmas. After his salary was paid, then Chris continued his trip to Alaska. One day, Tracy Tetro approached Chris, who was alone in Ronnie and Jane's trailer. After they got acquainted, Tracy took Chris to Salvation Mountain, where there were many local artworks. The artwork is made from used materials such as used tires, furniture, and auto parts. From here, the closeness between Chris and Tracy can be seen. One night, they were all making a barbecue and making a bonfire. Jane then told Chris where she had been married and was abandoned by her husband. Jane has a son who is probably Chris's age. That's what made her a little traumatized when she first saw him. The day Chris had been waiting for arrived, he already had the money from his salary and was about to head to Alaska. He was escorted by Jane and Ronnie to a station. As a parting gift, Jane gave him a hand-knitted hat. Chris began his journey to live in the wild. Not long after, Chris arrived at Salton City. He met a traveler and they traveled together. On the way, they met a nudist who was bathing in the lake. These nudists are people who never wear a single thread on their bodies. An old man named Ron invited Chris to stay at his house. Ron tells Chris that he is a war veteran. After retiring, he experienced post-war stress, which made him an alcoholic. This alcoholic habit made Ron's family leave him from where he chose to live alone and approach himself to God. Ron spent his days as a leather craftsman for clothes and shoes. He also taught Chris how to sew leather. One day, Chris took Ron to go up the hill, but Ron seemed hesitant with Chris's invitation. Finally, Chris persuaded Ron, and they were on top together. At the top of the hill, Chris tells Ron that happiness comes not only from human relationships, but also from everything around him. Ron agreed with Chris's words, but he also gave him advice. If Chris believes in the power of God, then he must learn to forgive his family. By forgiving them, he will be able to love his family, and with love, God will surely provide an easy way. One day came the day of their separation. Ron was very sad to lose Chris. He drove him to the Alaskan border with a heavy heart. He even offered to be Chris's adoptive parent. However, Chris was determined to continue his journey to Alaska. Ron then released Chris with emotion. Chris is then seen escorted by someone named Jim. He was the last person to see Chris. After he got out of Jim's car, he started into the Alaskan jungle. Chris then met the bus he met at the film's beginning and named it the Magic Bus. He started his life in the wild. He lived side by side with wild animals around him. He also started hunting for survival. He spends time writing a diary on the sidelines of his activities. In his diary, he says he will return to his original life when he finishes writing the novel. 3 weeks later, Chris began to lose weight due to a lack of nutrition and food. The hair on his face was clearly visible. His food supply was running out. He began to feel lonely, but did not dampen his intention to survive. One day, Chris accidentally met a deer. Not wasting the opportunity, he sneaked and targeted the deer until he finally caught the deer. Chris immediately ran to his magic bus and took his knife and notebook. Armed with a notebook from Wayne, he painstakingly slaughtered the deer. After a few hours, Chris brought the venison one by one to the river bank and made a stove to smoke the meat. Several flies seemed to have started to approach Chris's meat, but he finally managed to get rid of the flies, the venison he had just caught. He then began to smoke the venison he had. A few hours later, he rechecked the venison. Apparently, the deer meat has been eaten by flies and larvae. As a result, the only ones who eat the meat are wolves. Days passed until Chris entered the 9th week in the wild. He seems to be reading a family happiness novel where it inspires him to be close to the people he loves, and his determination to return to his family is stronger. He then decided to return to his family home. But unfortunately, in the middle of the journey, the river that was passed yesterday suddenly was very heavy. At first, Chris had wanted to try to cross the river, but he was almost carried away by a powerful river current. Chris then decided to return to the magic bus in a state of fear. As a result of the swift river, some of the animals became difficult to find around his location. Chris, who was getting hungry, made him look for some edible plants around the forest in a hurry. But his body condition worsened instead of getting healthier after eating the plant. His body was thinner, and his head was dizzy, making Chris weak and helpless. Turns out the plant he ate yesterday was poisonous. One day, Chris was approached by a bear. But the bear just looked at him and left him alone. Chris began to remember Ron's words that true happiness can be found when we share that happiness with fellow human beings, not alone as he did. Chris began to realize that he was getting close to death. He began to feel his end was approaching until he couldn't feel his anger. On the back page of his book, he wrote his gratitude to God for giving him happiness even in his last moments. He then remembered all the beautiful moments with his parents until he died. From the start, it seemed that Chris had no intention of living in the wild forever. But because of this, he was forced to die on his magic bus alone. He was found dead 2 weeks later, in September 1992. The moral that can be learned from this movie is the meaning of happiness, where happiness can arise when we share happiness with fellow human beings and also other creatures of God. And happiness will come to us if we are always grateful.